This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 314 of the Craft Beer and Brewing podcast, and we've got a special fresh hop brewing panel episode this week coming at you. Joining me are three award-winning fresh hop brewers. Start off with some introductions so that people can understand who I'm talking to and who's a part of this. First is Joe Morfeld from Pinthouse. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Jamie. Great to be here. Excited to talk about fresh hops. This is going to be a lot of fun.
I should say welcome back to the podcast, and I should say that to all of you because all three of you have been on the podcast before. Steve Luke from Cloudburst is with us. Steve?
Thanks, Jamie. Happy to be here. Happy to talk about fresh hops, or wet hops, as some say.
We will, maybe we'll parse the difference between those and how you all refer to all of these things now that the world of fresh hop and wet hop is getting so complex. And Zach Turner is also here. Welcome back, Zach.
Thanks, Jamie. Nice to talk with you again.
For those of you that aren't familiar, Pinthouse, I went back and checked these kinds of medals that you guys win for fresh hop beers. Pinthouse started winning in 2018 with a World Beer Cup silver for this year's crop wet hop, 2019 GABF gold for fresh hop green battles, which you won again a silver for in 2021. 2022 won bronze in the fresh hop category for fresh hop training binds. And of course, Double Dry Hopped Green Battles was a 2019 Craft Beer and Brewing Editor's Pick and one of our best 19 beers of 2019. Cloudburst, 2019 World Beer Cup Bronze for Fresh Frozen. Later that year, you won GABF Bronze. Then, of course, in 2021, Craft Beer and Brewing named Aqua Seafoam Shame one of our best 20 beers of 2021. Single Hill got on the map, or got on the awards list with a gold in 2021 for Energy Cone. You beat someone else that year who had a silver in the same category. Anyway, lots and lots and lots of awards and award-winning beers from the three of you guys. And so we're going to talk about your approach to fresh hop beers, some of the new technologies for making fresh hop beers that you all are employing, some of the cutting-edge techniques that you all are using, how you go about doing these, some of the similarities and some of the differences in those things, using hops like individually quick frozen hops, 301 trial hops. I'm sure Zach can talk about making his own pellets out of the current crop year stuff, some of the pioneering techniques that you all have been doing. Before we do that, for years, G&D Chillers has chilled the beers you love, partnering with 3,000 plus breweries across the country. They're proud of the cool partnerships they've built, offering 24/7 service and support. G&D builds with non-proprietary parts, expert craftsmanship, and constant innovation. G&D's in-house engineering crew have been piping breweries, wineries, and distilleries for over 30 years. They offer free piping design and consultation with the sale of every chiller they build. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com or call to discuss your next project. Also, this episode is brought to you by our friends at BSG, who invite you to experience one of the newest hops from their Hop Solutions line, HS Grove. Developed for hop-forward beer styles, HS Grove boasts incredible biotransformation qualities, giving you the power to transform your next IPA into a stone fruit powerhouse. Choose HS Grove for West Coast IPA, New England IPA, Double IPA, American Pale Ale, or any beer style where delicious fresh fruit aromatics are desired. Visit bsgcraftbrewing.com to learn more. And scheduling freight carriers should be the last thing on a brewer's mind, so why not trust the experts to handle freight for your ingredients? Old Orchard's partnered with a leading logistics firm in the craft beverage industry to transport your flavored craft concentrate blends. When you order 2 pails or more from Old Orchard, you qualify for freight quotes. To get started, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. Maybe just kick things off, with a kind of overview about some of the similarities and some of the differences in the way that you all make fresh hop beers. And Steve, you're a Seattle native, or not a Seattle native, but a Seattle brewer who's been going over the mountains to Yakima and grabbing hops from very early days for a long time now. Let's maybe kick it off with you. Talk to me about how fresh hop brewing has evolved in the long time that you've been doing it, and then what that looks like now for Cloudburst.
Ooh, how it's evolved. I mean, I think in sheer volume alone, it's evolved dramatically. I feel like back in the, early aughts, 2009, 2008, 2010, like we'd all just brew one, and it would be like, this one beer, we're going to make a big trip out of it. No one knows how to, no one really knows what we're doing out there. So farms are confused. They don't know how to bill us. It's just like, here's some beer. Thanks. Here's some hops. The communication wasn't great. To, the last few years, it's like, at least for a Northwest brewery, and Zach can kind of confirm, it's like, there's at least a handful that I feel like most breweries do a handful. Between myself and Zach and even Chris Baum at Varietal, we've had to kind of have a pause, like an arms race pause, where it's like, how many are you going to do this year? Because we can't keep doing more and more. It's not fair. So we're doing 10 this year, Zach, just so you know. I got it all penciled out.
That's 10 brew days.
10 brew days.
Gotcha. That's more than us. So
no, don't say that.
At the same time, at the same time, brewers like Fremont, have gone into like taking entire fields and building entire brands, brewing thousands of barrels of fresh hop beer. And the organization and the structure and the approach to that has gotten pretty significant. For you, Steve, what is it about fresh hop beers? Because it's expensive. The ingredients are expensive. The logistics are hard. And there's a lot to it. What is it about those beers themselves that still makes them attractive for you? I mean, I can see why Zach can do it, because he can just drive to farms as we did last year, where we're out there and just go pick up some hops and come back to the brewery and brew them. But I mean, it's a little more involved, not to mention somebody like Joe brewing them down in Texas. But what is it, for you, Steve, about the allure of these beers that brings you back and puts so many on the schedule every year?
Well, I mean, a lot of it goes back to the connections with the farmers that we have. So, producing it from a passion on that side, and then really like the beer drinkers, around Seattle, around Washington, have really come to embrace like the true seasonality, of the beer. It is a lot of work. I mean, I guess talking back on the evolution, I used to go out there same day, grab hops, come back, start my brew. We now get hops the evening before we brew the next morning, just to kind of make it slightly more manageable as far as like a logistics standpoint goes. But yeah, I mean, what it's still, even being 2.5 hours away, it's really relatively close. And I think we've had this conversation quite a bit with brewers that are out here that, we'd be crazy not to. We have 75% of all the hops grown, 2.5 hours to our east. We've got another 15-20%, just 3.5 hours to our south. So it's like, why not push burnout every year to make something so fragile and fleeting and beautiful and unique ultimately? So from relationships to growers to brewers to drinkers.
Zach, what is it for you about fresh hop beers that that keep you so engaged with it every year?
Yeah. When we opened this brewery, it really wasn't part of the plan to make a ton of fresh hop beers. Like, we wanted to make diverse beers in Yakima, but by the first harvest, I think we made like 3, because it just was kind of easy and simple. And then I think partly it was COVID to some extent. Like, we were just here hanging out, and there wasn't much else to do. So we were like, well, we are in this place where we have really some of the best access in the world to amazing hops. It would be a shame not to take advantage of that and to like lean into that as completely as we can. And then the thing that really keeps it going for us, and we're really thinking about this a lot this year as we put together our plan, is because we're here, we have this ability to just access farms and we have close relationships, is to find as many ways to connect each of these fresh hop brews with another group and share it as widely as we can. Like, when we had you out last year to brew some fresh hop along with the guys from Zeke's, like, that's an example. We've done fresh hop collaborations with Joe. We've done one with Steve too. And so each of the brews this year, we're really trying to focus on a different like type of group that we can share fresh hop brewing with. So in a lot of cases, it's less collaborations with brewers, it's more collaborations with people in other aspects of beer. And it's just a really, really fun way to share it with people. It's like, it's really unique that because all the hops are grown in such a concentrated area, the number of people that actually have seen what's going on is very small. And we're in a place where we can really play host to that and open up our doors, and then also like open up our contacts and connections and bring people out. And I think that's what makes it the most fun and exciting for us these days.
There is a really beautiful, almost ritual element to it. And being able to drive out to the fields to cut down some vines, throw them in the back of a truck, take them over to a small picker, and then pull bags of hops that, you just cut down as they were growing, and then go and make a beer from them. It just feels so connected. It closes this loop between agriculture and the beer, and, in such a special way. Joe, for you, what is it about fresh hop beers that either from a flavor or from a process standpoint that gets you excited and gets you going through all the logistic hurdles that you have to go through to make fresh hop beers from your brewery in Texas?
For me, it's, I grew up in southern Minnesota, a big agricultural area. And, I think the farming focus for brewing has always been really important to me. We've always said we make really agriculturally driven beers. And a lot of that is around the hops. And I think what I love about doing fresh hops, especially here in Austin, is I get to tell the story about the people who grow my raw materials, that we go out and hand select every year. And I get to explain that to people, because a lot of people down here, again, I think it was Steve's point about, he's 2.5 hours away, but like a lot of people don't understand how much is grown in one little region. And you get to tell that story to a new audience, and people really latch onto it, and they're very excited every year when we get to do it. And we've done some really fun beers, where we, just focus on one farm's hops, and we tell the story through our social media, and we tell the story over the bar. And so, yeah, for me, a lot of it's the storytelling aspect. And the storytelling comes from going and building those relationships, where Steve's going back and forth over the pass. I'm building Alaska miles, going back between Austin and Seattle, in the months of August and September. My wife sees me probably less than I see Zach some Septembers. But it's something that I really love. And, honestly, I call some of the, a lot of those farmers friends at this point. We just text back and forth and talk about what we're up to. And, so it's really fun to bring that story to Austin and to, our little area in Texas, and get to brew these beers. And really, it takes me back when I get to brew them to those times I spend, like you said, going and grabbing that vine. I got memories of going with Zach out to Jason's Peralt's, and, we're putting a vine, him and I don't know why he let us, but we're like fishing vines through the little wolf picker, and grabbing those cones and driving them back to his brewery. So, when I get to taste these beers that I brew back here, it takes me back there. It's a sense of place. And so I love it. That's the part I love the most, is it really roots you, and it gives you a sense of place, and it continues to reiterate how important the agricultural aspect of brewing is.
There is something to this idea of a beer being limited without it having to be precious, and I think that's one of those fun things about fresh hops, where you can make beers that are more limited but also more precious through barrel aging or, something along those lines, and that become harder to buy and harder to, whereas this is one of those beers that it's limited, but it's not precious. It's something that you can drink in these kinds of quantities and enjoy lots of, but after a certain point, it's not going to be there anymore. Although now, and we will talk about this later in the podcast, there are new techniques that you guys are employing, because we're drinking fresh hop beers right now as we do the podcast. You guys planned and prepped and actually using some modern products for these, whether, and we can talk about that again later. You both Single Hill and Pinthouse have brewed fresh hop beers for all of us to drink, and timed it so that they could ship out. And we'll talk about some of those techniques that you're using to time shift the idea of fresh hop beer. But I also want to talk about flavor. I think that flavor of fresh hop beer is something, that also feels a little different, especially, almost all of your fresh hop beers are going to be in the IPA or pale ale kind of, family or category, just because those styles are going to, or maybe even West Coast Pilsner, which is whatever this extension of, we won't get into that. Nonetheless, like it's going to be in somewhere in this family because that's going to allow that hop character, to really come forward. But the fresh hops that you use have some distinct character, to them, and some kind of flavor commonality that is driven by that, that fresh hop, element. Talk to me about, how you think about those flavors, Steve. Like, when you think about the fresh hops that you use and how you build beers around, how do you think about those flavors? And how do you think about, designing beers that are going to amplify these flavors that you really love about fresh hop beers?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I find myself talking a lot about just like the textural component of like the chew, like the leafiness. There's so much chlorophyll contact with wort while we're making these beers that it's just inevitable that you're going to pick up, some like vegetal component. And then really like where the skill level is kind of pushed is like, how do you get it to that line of like, I can blindly tell that this is a fresh hop because of this like leafy, grassy, chewy component to it, while not making that, off-putting in any way, so it's kind of a fine line. And as we kind of talk about some of these newer products, they certainly start to kind of help you. It's a whole new, thing to figure out, but they kind of to elevate our game at the end of the day. But yeah, for the most part, I'm looking more for this like textural component. Purists back in the day, like a fresh hop beer had to be only fresh hops, only wet hops, and like that was it. And I think, like most craft brewers, no one likes rules here. So if ultimately you can make the beer better by adding something here, adding something there, you can't just kind of make a rule that's going to have your beer have a low ceiling. So kind of like little tips and tricks, I think still every year, like trying just to really dial in bitterness on the beers is kind of like my biggest challenge, because it's just such an unknown. No one knows, what our utilization is going to be at what addition. And it's not like there's some white paper out there that Sierra Nevada has put together that I'm aware of, that at least kind of tells me how I can kind of dial in like what BUs I actually have going up.
Joe, Zach, how do you guys think about the flavor of fresh hop beers?
Well, I think going back to what you were saying about them being like not precious, but special. For me, it's this ephemeral quality of them. They're here, then they're gone. And like every recipe we create is going to be only relevant in that one moment. Like we're not going to do it again the same way. It's impossible from like a logistics point to like have everything line up like the way it did this year. And then also the hops are going to taste different the next time. When we're brewing with well-processed T90s, like there's a lot of homogenization that goes on. You have a lot of consistency, and like the entire supply chain is oriented towards consistency and replication. And this is a time of year to make a beer that tastes like the day you went out to find stuff. And like that's really the way that we make our fresh hop recipes. There might be some varietal like intention behind the plan for the day, like we want to go find these two varieties. But often that even changes in the moment depending on conditions on the ground, what we find or where we stop. A lot of our recipes have more to do with who we're working with at the farm, like who we want to work with, and then who we're bringing in to collaborate and what they kind of want to do for the day. And then that forms the flavor. We can't reproduce them exactly, We could put the same name on it, which we do from time to time.
One of a kind.
But each year is a vintage. I mean, they're not trying to be precious like wine, but like really it is kind of a vintage sort of thing. That's the direction we take.
How about you, Joe, for flavor?
Yeah, I think for us, it's interesting, again, being a little more removed from the valley. Like we try to get up there. We got some, we've had some fun stories where, we would, actually my favorite is we went and we just bought a bale. Well, we didn't buy. I mean, this goes back to Steve's point about like no one really knew how to charge you for it, but we got a bale of Mosaic from Jason a while back, years ago, and we put it in the minivan and we drove it back to Yakima and we cut it up and we shipped it overnight to Austin and we brewed with it. And, that was like, we really were excited about that particular, lot we smelled it 2 days earlier on the, drying room floor. And we're like, we want some of that. Like we want that. We want to be able to brew a beer with that and remind ourselves. So I think the flavor for us is, to Zach's point too, it's a sense of place. I think it goes back to telling that story. Like we want to bring people along on our journey and how we find these things. We've had to be a lot more creative over the years on how to get that, like not being able to, necessarily run down the road or jump over the pass. So we've been creative and we've found ways to get the hops back to Austin and provide that flavor for people. I think it's evolved for us a lot too, though, over the last couple of years, especially with some of the new hop products. And I think it's kind of creating a sense of place of like what is hop harvest versus a specific farm, and some of that is derived from some of the newer hop products. But some of that stuff, like you were mentioning, Steve and I both. Actually, the way we connected was through the World Beer Cup, where we were medaled in fresh hop, and we both did fresh frozen that year because World Beer Cup is spring. So how do you have a fresh hop in spring? And what we were doing for years was we would get fresh hops, we'd have them overnighted, and we would vacuum seal them all and freeze them, and we would brew with them throughout the year, so we could make fresh hops like when we wanted to. And then I found out Steve did that too, and that was pretty cool. And then so we went and brewed a beer together, which was the first time we brewed together, which was really fun. But it kind of like extended that memory, but yeah, it's for us the flavor aspect is really like trying to place us in that field, rubbing those cones. It's very visceral. I think Steve used the word textural. Like it's I think it's all of that. It's really a sense of place. I think it's more than just you're drinking a beer. You're really experiencing that beer.
Sure. Let's talk about hop varieties then, and we can we'll go and talk about some of the newer products and technologies I think down the road. But I'm curious about this. When I think about it, when I think about fresh hop beers, I think about those kinds of soft, like there's a softness as well as a pungency in the flavor itself that they feel. Whereas a T90 pellet might have some like, more aggression in the way that it expresses. When I think about fresh hop beers, I always think about this kind of, they're like genteel, there's just this kind of, beautiful refinement and maybe a slight distance to them, but everything feels rounded and, and soft. Are there, specific varieties that you all find yourselves leaning on because they express well and they express with this kind of fresh hop polish that you're looking for, and then the flip side of that, are there some where, some varieties where you've tried them and maybe it's harder to get the kind of expression that you're looking for out of a fresh hop beer for whatever reason? Not to be negative about individual hops, but I'm curious if you focus your fresh hop use in some certain varietal ways.
I think in general, most IPA hops are kind of still those varieties that we're kind of leaning towards when we make those beers. There hasn't really been a variety that I've had where it's like, wow, this is surprisingly this wet hop Triumph IPA, not to shit on Triumph, but we're not putting it in IPAs. So we've all tried, and it wasn't like, oh, you know what, this works in this version and, not the other. But I think conversely, you can still be surprised by some. I mean, I find myself gravitating towards more classic varieties that are being picked, especially now that acreage is down, I guess, except for Cascade, which I heard they're trying to plant more of all of a sudden. But kind of just because
Slightly down, Steve.
slightly down.
8% down. I mean, that's
Yeah, tiny bit, but like
it's a much smaller dip than we saw, in the late 2000s. And so I think we all have to keep this, frame of reference. Like, we're used to all things going up. This is not the first time that hops acreage has taken a pretty significant dip. And the industry has been able to recover, and everything is going to fine and be okay. Nonetheless, sorry.
Everything's going to be fine. It's going to be fine.
It's only lasted for 4 to 5 generations.
Yes, yeah. That poor 6th, 7th generation.
In the United States.
In the United States, yeah.
But I don't
like that 2009, 2010. Like, I mean, it took a bigger acreage drop and a far bigger percentage drop in terms of overall acres, being harvested. So we're going to be okay on this one.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, like, I don't know, those varieties, I think since one positive I've seen, and we don't really plan around, we kind of like know when our windows for varieties are, but we always try to have a few tanks for flaors of hops. Like, I've still never used Idaho 7. I've still never used Equinaut. I'm hoping for maybe some Vista this year or 1320, if it lines up with when I'm in Yakima, kind of a thing, is kind of more on where we're going there. But the fact that Seattle drinkers, Northwest drinkers are so in tune with fresh hop beers and wet hop beers that even if we make an IPA with Cascade, or we make an IPA with Crystal, or Nugget, they're going to be consuming it, and it almost reintroduces those people to varieties that aren't very flashy and still have a really interesting, unique character. It's like a way to remind people that, other hops still exist.
Joe, how about you? Are there some varieties that you lean on, because it's expensive for you to get them down there. You need those beers to work. It's a little harder just to kind of just be purely experimental about it.
Yeah. So for us, I think from a wet perspective, and we're getting them unkilned, whether that's just overnighted down here or, the IQF at 301 products, Mosaic is definitely our horse. We think that one has the kind of the most punch. If you look at the beers that we've been recognized for in that category, it's Mosaic has been the driver in all of those, which I think, also kind of reiterates that. We also do a lot of fresh dried. So we'll, while we're out there, we might find something that we really like, and we'll send that back like overnight and try to brew with that right away. Amarillo's one that I absolutely love in a fresh dried. When you get a really nice lot. Chinook, I think Chinook is one that Steve talked about Cascade. I think Chinook is one that people sleep on sometimes. We use a lot of Chinook. Absolutely love that hop. I think when you get that really fresh, it's just so bright. It almost like has this like amazing kind of like piney grapefruit. It's delicious. So, if I was to list just even two, Mosaic and Chinook are probably the ones that we use the most of, but we use a lot of Simcoe, a little bit of Citra. That's probably the one we use the least in fresh hops. We just feel like or in wet hops, feel like it doesn't quite punch at the same weight that some others do, but people use it with great success. So it's it's certainly a great hop. It's not one I'd say you're still going to get great results, but Mosaic and Chinook are our two favorites, probably in that fresh wet and fresh dry.
Zach, you brew a bunch of these and throw them up in your rodeo where, even the folks in your tap room get to vote on their favorites. And so, you get to do a lot of, instant market research on those things that connect with folks. From that perspective, whether it's crowd favorites or whether it's favorites of you or your brewers, are there some specific hops that you find work really, really well in that kind of fresh and wet area?
A couple things that have surprised us over the years are cashmere in particular, as like a fresh dried. Could just be really wonderful. I mean, you have to find it at the right time, and there's, I would say, a decent amount of variability in cashmere. But that's been really nice for us. We're usually using that as fresh dried, and Sabro as well, as a wet Sabro or fresh dried Sabro can be. It has the most flavor and character that you can find at that really, really early point in harvest. The other things you're going to find at that point are Centennial, early, mid, late, kind of when like the whole Centennial range when Sabro is coming off, and some early Simcoe. So, and Cascade, probably early Cascade. So having some Sabro available can really add some complexity, as long as you don't lean on it too hard, because even though it is kind of, it can be really nice, it can also be really too much. But those two are nice ones that we do work in, and we do rely on to add a little bit of a complexity and diversity to the hop profiles we make. Otherwise, like on the wet side, because we use wet obviously a lot and in the hop back, and then we use a lot of exclusively fresh dried for dry hops. But on the wet side, we're typically relying on some of the, the big main varieties that are reliable and consistent. You can go out and find a good lot of it on the day when we need it.
I want to ask you all about, fresh dried, and what that actually, what it means first. I know what you mean, but I want you to explain a little bit of that. And then I also want to dive into what the difference is between, say, a fresh dried baled hop or a fresh dried whole cone hop that you're then making pellets out of for your dry hop, versus some sort of, pelletized and then hop that you might then get months later, what that kind of age means. Before we talk about that, take your brewing to the next level with AccuBrew's revolutionary fermentation monitoring system, now predicting specific gravity. AccuBrew's mobile app and stainless steel sensor work together to send you live data from inside your tanks, including predicted gravity, fermentation activity, clarity, and temperature. Unlike other fermentation monitoring systems, AccuBrew is CIP ready and designed to stay out of your way, saving you time and space. Their set it and forget it solution streamlines systems and processes, helps maintain consistency, and detect problems before they ruin a batch. Join the AccuBrew community today and experience 24/7 peace of mind. Also, brewing is currently one of the most innovative, adaptive, and fast-paced industries in the world. With consumer demand shifting to the latest and greatest trend, it can be difficult for production teams to keep up with requirements. The ProFill series of rotary can fillers from ProBrew are accelerating plant production everywhere. These can fillers run at speeds of 100 to 600 plus cans per minute while achieving precise and consistent filling volumes not achievable by most inline and mobile fillers. For more information, visit www.probrew.com or email contactus@probrew.com to learn exactly how they can take your operations to the next level. ProBrew, brew your beer. And Tabsky QR code ordering is the future of brewery ordering. With Tabsky, your customers can order and pay for their beers right from their phones by scanning a QR code on the table. Get rid of lengthy lines and increase check size by up to 30%. Tabsky is free for operators and integrates seamlessly with popular payment systems like Clover and Square. So why not join the future of brewery ordering and give Tabsky a try? Learn how you can get started today at Tabsky, TABSKI.com. So let's talk about, fresh dried. That's a term you use. I think it's not a common term necessarily out there in the industry. But I'm curious about this. It seems to track with other things, other conversations brewers are having about using obviously freshly milled grain, freshly roasted dark malts, versus dark malts that have been sitting for 6 months at a time, freshly grinding herbs before using them in a beer. And it seems to track with exactly the way the chefs think about these things, that there is and can be, both benefits, in some spaces for using this fresh dried hop. Talk to me about what it is about that fresh dried, say, as you were talking about Idaho 7 versus a, pelletized and, Idaho 7 that might be 6 months old, or, using a fresh dried hop Zach that you're pulling in cones and then making your own pellets out of, and how that differs in your dry hop versus using traditional pellets.
Well, I think we've taken this to the extreme, like more than the other guys, but really anyone else out there probably, just because of our access. Since we started making fresh hops, we were just kind of dabbling with what happens if what would happen if we took cones from the cooling room floor back, and then first it was shredding them and then shoved them in a tank, which is really difficult to do, hard to get them in there. I'm not sure what Joe's doing for your method these days, but I know there's some like weed whackers and recirculation tanks involved. We sometimes.
Yeah, we've kind of gotten away from all that, but we have done liquid. We've done the nitrogen, so I freeze them, and then like huge immersion blender kind of things. Honestly, got like too chlorophyll driven. But yeah, I mean, we use a lot of our fresh dry. We just do whole cone. We don't try to shred them. I think we look for that kind of like, that little bit of extra layer, But yeah, we've tried a lot of funny techniques. When you look back in hindsight, when we did it seemed like it was the coolest thing ever. Like, it's also really fun to play around, nitrogen, and makes for a good show. But
are you making fun of Oregon right now?
I don't know.
Not all of Oregon.
We did. I think that was the last time we did that was probably 5 or 6 years ago. But it was fun. It was fun.
Yeah. So we've settled on. We bought a pellet mill a couple of years ago. So we use that for pelletizing all the fresh dry that we bring in, because then we can use them basically like regular pellets. In terms of like the character and what's different, I can't necessarily say specifically, but we feel like we like it better. And we're also doing it because we've just sort of decided dogmatically it would be more fun if we only used hops from the current crop year to make it entirely a fresh hop beer. And like, if we weren't in Yakima, like, we probably wouldn't have invented that rule for ourselves, because it would be ridiculously complicated, hard to do. But because we're here, it just kind of makes the whole thing a bit more fun and like adds to the challenge. I feel like brewers generally like constraints. Like the Reinskebot is all about constraint. It's about having 3 things to make beer out of. So we just invented our own constraint around having to use fresh dried hops if we want to dry hop with a pellet, if we want to dry hop with something that's not a wet cone. And we found in the early years that we didn't really, and I've been making fresh hop beers before, single mill too, but I just don't really enjoy the flavor of a wet cone in a fermentation, a wet cone in a dry hop. It gets too green, too chlorophyll-y. It's a really good way to also like impact the shelf life of a beer. So we just don't do that here. So in order to continue to make beers we really like and add a lot of character, like, we need to put something in for a dry hop, and pellets are the way to do that. Fresh dried's the way to do that. So for us, because we can really, I mean, that's what it comes down to. We like to use a lot of fresh dried, and we also think it makes some unique flavors, but I couldn't say specifically like what those are. There's probably a little more intensity, maybe a little more character, but a really well processed T90 pellet from the last harvest, like, could be, nearly identical.
How's that fall for you, Steve?
Well, I'm curious, like, Zach, have you stored any of those pellets, those fresh killed pellets from your mill, like, nitro vacuum sealed bags? Like, how do those hold up in 3 months, 6 months time?
We have stored them and they're fine. The way we're pelletizing, we do get really good quality. The main difference is, I think, is we see a coarser grind and a bit wetter pellet, because they haven't really, like, the bale, they didn't sit in a bale and kind of equalize. So we end up with very coarse, fluffy pellets, and we throw them in the freezer, and then we take them out. There's like more of a block instead of like flowable thing of pellets. But we don't do that too much. Usually by the end of harvest, we're like completely cashed out and exhausted, and like all the rest of the hops go into whatever the last beer is. And so we don't have a lot of carryover typically, but we have a backup freezer this year, so we might have some carryover.
The hop freezer is the best thing that you can invest in. We got a big one at this point. Now, Zach, I was thinking about...
How many bodies fit in your freezer, Joe?
Oh, it's a lot. I mean, I think we can get it's like 48 pallets if you stack them right and stuff. So
in your freezer.
Well, yeah, because we like to cold chain ship hops down. I mean, it's hot here, and so like we like to take a big truck at a time, and then we can like stuff our freezer and store them. I think that's one of the things that we've like it's an investment in that quality aspect of making sure that we can bring all those in, store them for not talking fresh hops right now, but just talking even our pellets and cryo and all the other products that we buy. So it's it's a lot. But Zach, I was gonna say, I remember we did that part of your rodeo one year, and we ground up all those hops and we were trying to shove them in the top of the tank. Or maybe it wasn't the rodeo, but yeah, it was. I mean, we were like, there's some pretty funny photos
where we were on the ladder,
like literally
with a
just
paddle
pushing them in. Yeah. So the pellets are a lot nicer.
This guy trying to get them.
Yeah.
Steve, what's your dry hopping on these look like? Do you, are you pulling in fresh dried hops in your dry hops for fresh hop beers?
I mean, typically we don't have access to those. I mean, other than like, there's one farm in Yakima that, kind of has fresh pellets is a thing, is their thing. And we use those sometimes, but, it's a pretty cool, it's a cool way to differentiate yourself. That farm is fantastic. That's Roy Farms. We'll go T90s and cryo. I mean, like kind of more of a typical dry hop, although now that like TR301s are out there, we'll be using those as a portion of our dry hop as well. And I think that, kind of what Zach mentioned too, once we kind of get into this talk of these newer products, that's a wet cone pellet basically. Is this Jamie? Is this your like sneaky segue into like new things right now, or
you're doing it for me, Steve? I appreciate you putting the work in.
He's just gonna tease it until we're out of time. Actually,
yeah. And we're up.
We got plenty of time. Let's talk about 301 and IQF and some of these other evolving, products. And Steve, why don't you just keep that conversation going because you started it.
Yeah, sure. We'll keep it going. I mean, I almost feel like that these products were invented for Joe. And then, I'm
going to pour myself some of your beer now, Joe, just so I'm making sure I'm referencing these correctly.
But yeah, I guess to kind of take a half step back, the last 5 years as fresh wet hop beers have become more and more popular, and their range has, left the Northwest and have been brewed all over the country. Fairly quickly, hop farms and brokers realized that it was really hard to ship wet hops, overnight somewhere via traditional methods. So there's been a lot of like fun, creative, some better than others, development. Is like, how do we get wet hops to Texas? How do we get wet hops to Georgia? And like, how are they still okay enough to brew with, when they kind of get there? So it's kind of all roads lead to the freezer. And the IQF little chain. I mean, Zach, you probably heard whispers before I did, as far as, like throwing fresh picked unkilned wet hops through an IQF freezing belt, and then a few years later, all of a sudden those frozen wet whole cones were being pelletized into 301s. So
yeah, the IQF hops isn't particularly new in terms of concept. It's been around a long time. There's even like old patents related to freezing hops instead of kilning them from, I forget what the years. When I was looking at up some of this stuff while I was at YCH as an alternative to kilning. But I think in the past, some processors had tried to do IQF hops and they just didn't find a market, or they didn't find enough anchor customers for it. So while it worked, they didn't end up turning it into a product line. And that's kind of what YCH is least reasonably successfully done now by like running hops through IQF line, which stands for individually quick frozen, which is the same process that blueberries run through, or raspberries or strawberries that you go buy in your bag at Costco or something. The line is identical. So they're just running hops through it and packaging them off.
And that works in Yakima because a lot of other fruits that are IQF processed are also grown in Yakima, sure. And so as long as the timing works out, you can use some of the same equipment without having to buy new stuff. Joe,
yeah, there's at least a few here.
Yeah. Just a couple. Joe, for you, using fresh hops and using wet hops, or now IQF and 301 trial, which is basically a pelletized version of IQF hops.
It's a cryo process version, actually.
Okay.
So the 301 is they're taking IQF hops, so they're already frozen, and they're running them through the cryo line. This is also YCH products, and so the cryo line shatters the cone, separates it, and then repelletizes it. So you couldn't pelletize it if it was just a frozen cone. I think you can barely do it as the cryo because it's just so wet. The moisture content is 70% instead of 10, and it kind of melts into Play-Doh. The 301 does, even at that moisture content, So yeah, sorry to clarify there and interrupt, but
when it comes to using them, Joe, how has using these worked out for you, especially grabbing them remotely and having them shipped down to Texas?
It's great. I think we were honestly one of the kind of out of market test subjects for this early on because we do use a lot of fresh hop and wet hop, and so what I love about it too is one of the hard things about bringing a wet hop into Texas is you put it on an airplane, it's overnighted down here. There's a pretty big carbon footprint around that. And so, although this isn't like a small carbon footprint, it's definitely smaller. And I know YCH is doing a lot of studies on the carbon footprint of getting these hops out to brewers. And that's one thing that, for me, I care a lot about that we can get this in a little bit more efficient way, and we're not putting quite as much impact on the environment just to make a beer that I want to make. I'm not completely selfish in that way. But for what it's done for us is, we've used a lot of different products. So the beer that I sent y'all, Layers of Flavor, it's a West Coast Pils. Thank Bob down in Highland for the future of what is IPA. It's called West Coast Pils. It's we found that we can use now all these hop products in different places. So, this beer is pellet through the kettle. It's whole leaf dried in the hop back and in the mash. It's actually has some IQF in the hop back as well, which is the whole cone version of it that we've had in our freezer. It's got some T90, it's got some cryo, it's got some 301 in the dry hop. So we can create all these layers of flavor, hence the name, from all these different products. And I think it gives us another tool in the toolbox. And that's the thing that I love as a brewer is it's not a CO2 extract. It's not a flowable. I think those are great too. But it's not changing the aromatics or the flavor we still know what farm this came off of, and it still gives you a sense of place, and it gives you this character that, for us in Texas, when we were getting overnighted, they didn't come in as good as the IQF do. They were starting to brown a little bit. Like, these are coming in, they smell just like I smelled them in pre-kiln. It's amazing. And that's these guys, they're fortunate enough to go pick them, and I've done some runs with both these guys, and you see how fast hops degrade when you grab them from the farm and drive them back when they're wet. And so this IQF process, I think it's really cool that, they can get that in there, and then they can cold chain ship it down to me, and I can brew a beer with, it's not 100%. We're using it at 20 or 30%. We're just giving it that character that's trying to drive home some of that really fresh hop character that we love, and still make it really drinkable. Because at the end of the day, we want something that, you can drink multiple pints of, I think we kind of spoke to it earlier, but some of the things about early fresh hops, I remember drinking them 15 years ago. It was like, okay, grab 500 pounds of wet hop, put them in a mash tun, run a beer through it. It was kind of undrinkable. I mean, it was cool, but like,
hey.
we did it at Odell too, Steve. Like we suffered through the same thing. Like we all told ourselves it was really delicious. We drank 4 ounces of it, and then we all we're like, yeah, this is delicious, right? Yeah, it's really good. But I think we're getting more refined with that process now.
Well, talk to me about that, because now you're using multiple forms of fresh and wet hops, or fresh frozen and reconstituted hops, as well as these pelletized cryo fresh hops. Yeah, but I think, if you're talking about it within a competition setting or even within a consumer setting, people drinking these, when you market it as a fresh hop beer, they have some expectation for what they're going to experience in terms of flavor. And they want that. And if it were just like a heavily Citra, dry hopped with, last harvest T90s, and it just came across as this very similar beer to the others that you've made, they wouldn't believe it as a fresh hop beer. And so you were also having to tell a flavor story that connects with what people's idea of fresh hop is, and that in some ways both connects with that assumption that they have, but also moves it forward and shows them that it can be more than just that. How then do you balance all of these, formats and ingredients in a way that allows for some of that fresh hop character to convey and sell the idea of fresh hop in that?
Well, I'm going to say first off, competition, I don't know if it's going to matter anymore because they dropped it from GABF this year.
It's because so early.
Yeah, but I mean, we have fresh hops.
I know.
Yeah, I think it's too bad they dropped that. I was hoping they would announce that later. I don't know if that's real.
And they used to do like that a couple of times. They did like a later separate session too.
Yeah.
Well, that was the one you
GBF
took
judging is also
Zach.
GBF judging is also like peak of harvest, like working to invite people to come make fresh hops. And actually, I'm going to be judging beer. Like, that's an awful week to not be in Yakima. Come on, guys.
I had to
that's
change
commentary for the BA. So.
No, I had to change my judging sessions to be to revert back and overlap over a weekend, so I can still get fresh hops the week before and the week after. And it's like, why? But no, Jamie, I guess this is kind of answering your question. The 301s, I think Zach, you got your hands on them first around here, and I think you dropped off the beer, and it was 2 days old, and I cracked a can as soon as I realized it was in our cooler, smelled it, and if I didn't know what you had used, I would have been furious. I'd be like, how did you literally take the cooling room floor aroma and throw it into a beer and have it instant, back to kind of Joe's memory of a place. It was you're like, this smells exactly like a cooling room floor. I have no idea how this happened. And so there is, not most beer drinkers don't know, they haven't been to a hop farm. They don't, they can only kind of really imagine what a hop farm smells like, through the picker, through the cooling floor, through a kiln.
Yeah, I have your text. It says, "Welp, smells like a fresh hop." So there's that.
Yes, because that was brewed off season, right? That was a March.
Yeah, it was February, March or something.
Yeah,
and that was let's go all in and try this product, try it out, and see what we can do with it, trying to come up with equivalent T90 rates and stuff.
But it faded so fast. It dropped off so hard that within a couple weeks, it's just you're playing with fire when you take something that is so fragile and then make it available year round. And I think when I personally started hearing about IQF and the 301s, like I think it's really exciting, and I'm using those products year round now too. But I was worried about the concern of of not precious but special like nature of harvest. If something is available year round, inherently that's less special, right? So and we kind of took the most seasonal beer style in existence, and we now can kind of do something quite similar throughout, and you kind of lose a little bit of a connection when there's more processes added to a product as well. So overall,
I agree with that.
Net positive. I think it's just one of those things that you're still thinking about it. There's pros and cons.
Yeah, for us, like we revisit fresh hop beer in the off season, like maybe once or twice a year. So we brewed a beer for this. We did one earlier this year, around like January or February, once people are kind of ready to maybe try a fresh hop again. But we've also been kind of nervous about devaluing the seasonality and the seasonality, ephemerality of it. And there's a bit of a communication like challenge with customers sometimes too. Maybe more for us than Steve, where our beer might. I think you sell a lot over your bar more than we do, like even can to go stuff. But we might have cans out there that might have gotten a little bit old, and we don't want people to question whether it's like a fresh hop from September or a fresh hop that we actually made, 2 weeks ago in January with these frozen fresh hops. And it can just be kind of confusing for people for a little while until people figure out that it's fresh frozen. Even this latest beer, we decided to not put fresh frozen on it just to like not make it. I don't know if that makes it less confusing or more confusing. Like the whole point is it's supposed to be available in September and October, but we are making things totally out of season in this way.
It's like the Oktoberfest that comes out in August.
Yeah, but I mean, Joe, to your point, like the quality of the IQF frozen fresh hops is really, really high. Like when we're going to farms, and Steve, you probably experience this more than we do because you have a bit more of a drive. Like you have to like be careful just in how you bag up your wet hops. And if you're picking up hops in the afternoon, it's a different situation than in the morning because there's a lot of heat in the cones. And, like making sure they're not dense, and you're fluffing them up, and as soon as you're getting them back, trying to put them in your cooler in a way where they might cool down overnight and they don't like build up even more heat so they don't degrade overnight and use them. You don't have any of that with the IQF stuff. They're extremely well preserved. It's pretty impressive. And
Joe,
also expensive.
Yeah. Joe, when it gets back to this question of how you balance these, especially when you're using them in a brew in all of these different formats, and I want you to address that. But before we do, you like wildly aromatic IPAs and tropical lagers? Good thing Omega designed thiolized yeast for just that reason. Thiolized yeast are a new tool for brewers to bring intense guava and passion fruit aromas out of your malts and hops. And wait, there's more. Omega yeast makes yeast to order with a consistent 1-week lead time, ensuring peak freshness and reliability. Also, keep your brewery running smoothly with 5-star chemicals. Their cleaning solutions are specifically formulated to meet the unique needs of breweries, ensuring that your equipment stays clean and free of harmful bacteria and contaminants. From cleaning fermenters to kegs, they have a solution for every step of the brewing process. Use 5-star chemicals today and taste the difference in your brews. And ABS Commercial has been a full-service brewery outfitter for over 10 years. They are proud to offer brew houses, tanks, keg washers, and small parts to brewers across the country, as well as equipment for distilling, cider making, wine making, and more. They know the ins and outs of brewing and the installation process and can design the perfect setup for you, whether you're just starting out or looking to expand. Contact them today at sales@abs-commercial.com to discuss your customized brewery needs. ABS Commercial, we are brewers. So, Joe, let's talk about that. When it gets down to the actual brewing process, as you're thinking about how to blend all of the, hops in all of these different formats, to still capture that kind of fresh hop character, but also capture these, beautiful elements that each of these different formats provide. How do you devise a hop bill for a beer like this?
Well, I think it depends on what we're setting out to brew initially. We tend to be, in that IPA realm most of the time. And we're a bit unique. We use a Cole strain for our house yeast, but we've actually been doing a lot with lager yeast for these beers because I think there's a sulfur lift that helps a lot with some of the natural. I think there's like some sulfur components that come off of the wet hop, the cones or the IQF at 301 or whatever. Like I think there's clearly a hop sulfur, and I think when you get that lift off of like our yeast German ale or like 3470, I think it just elevates all of that. So when we're constructing these recipes, we tend to like to bring in either the true wet hop or the true fresh dried into the mashed, into the hop back. It's pretty traditional. It's easy. I mean, we have 4 brew houses, but they're all like basic pub systems, and so we don't have a lot of opportunity to get super creative where we add them. So the mash is kind of always there, and then we clear out the mash lauter ton afterwards. We throw a bunch back in, and we run off the whirlpool through that. With the 301, what we found is, there's a lot of talk about multiple dry hops. We find that the 301 works really well with 2 dry hops in the second dry hop, especially when we're working with the yeast that we do. So we will tend to go in with, like our traditional T90 or a cryo pellet in the first dry hop. And then 2 days later, we'll jump in with the 301 pellets. We might also, put in another hop in a T90 form or a cryo form. So, and sometimes we'll use that, like the beer you're drinking has just a kiss of Nelson from this 2023 harvest from Freestyle, mixed in with the Simcoe Citrid Mosaic 301. But yeah, it seems to we're not getting kind of that transformative effect. We're not trying to get it in super early. We're just trying to use it a little bit later in that process. But we tend to separate the bulk of our T90 and then or cryo of the dried, and then bring in the 301.
With these beers, like, are you like the one we're drinking now that's the West Coast Bills with some contribution of 301 and a little bit of IQF? Like, are you marketing it like very clearly as a fresh hop, or how do you discuss it with customers? And
yeah, that's a good question. So we try to tell the whole story, right? We definitely never try to like do people on the saying like, hey, we're doing this fresh hop, and we're trying to say like, hey, this is this new thing. Like, we're trying to tell YCH's story on what the 301 process is, what the IQF process is. I think Layers of Flavor, we just market as a West Coast Pils brewed with IQF 301 hops. And then, if you get on our social media, you can read the whole story. But like when you look at a placard on our tap wall, we're not trying to say it's like a fresh hop beer necessarily. But yeah, it's an interesting, I think this becomes the biggest thing. And I think, you listen to all the podcasts Jamie's done over the last 5 years, and we struggle as craft brewers trying to define these beers that we're making, right? And we, I think Zach, you said it with the Rihansgabat, it's like we want to compartmentalize stuff, but like we live in this very post-structural world, and what really is what we're brewing is so outside of what we can define marketing wise. And so we definitely don't want to try to trick consumers, but we want to utilize these tools, and so we try to be very upfront with it. And I've said before, if you give the 301 product, I would move the 301 product into one of our core beers, if we could, get it with consistency, because I think it's so beautiful. I think it provides this element that drives you back to the valley, drives you back to the farm. And, so if we could put it into our electric jellyfish, I would be 100% in.
So Joe, do you charge more for a beer like this using 301 and IQF?
Only if we're using it at a higher rate, so we kind of had tiers. This is kind of in what is our experimental IPA tier range. So it's like the same price as any other experimental IPA tier range.
Because I feel like
that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, like for you being outside, the hop market, it's like, we charge more for our wet hop beers come season. And I mean, but the customer is seeing us on social media like, oh, look at the time, we're using 15 to 25 pounds per barrel of hops compared to like 6 to 7 total pounds per barrel of hops in a non-fresh hop beer. So it's like they can kind of compute. Granted, fresh hops, cost less than pelletized, but like they're still, anywhere from $3 to $5 a pound for the most part. So let alone like the extra long brew days it takes and everything kind of all the way through. So I'm curious, like in an outside market who might not be aware that you're using more expensive things that like take a lot of like time and effort and money and process just to get them to you, how do you let your drinkers know like, hey, this is special and like this also costs a lot more money?
Yeah, I mean, I think I look at it as they're beers that are passion projects. They're super fun. We don't make a lot of them. At the end of the day, we still, outside of the normal fresh hop window, which, we'll probably do 4 or 5 typically. That's kind of like our limit that we can pull off each year. In that window, we'll probably do 2 or 3 more, maybe now with the 301 or IQF product. And we try to make a big deal about it. We try to really tell that story on social media or over the bar. I mean, we're very fortunate in that sense. We have the bar, we have the ability to hand the customer the beer, and hopefully our bartenders are telling that story to the customer. But yeah, we're not trying to make a bunch of money off of it either. Like we're not losing money, but we put it in that experimental range, and that's actually where 301 has helped a lot. Is you think of the cost per pound, and then it goes to cryo. It's like a very confusing math of like, it still just works out to use 50% of what T90 is, and it kind of works out. So it's, it kind of all pencils out at the end of the day, and we make a little bit of money and we make a great beer, and I think we have a great story to tell to the consumer, and it works out in that way.
What I really want to get to is you mentioned fermentation being driven by being supported by lager yeast and this kind of sulfur supporting the structure of these hops here. I want to talk to all of you guys about your approach to fermentation on these beers, and what are the similarities with typical hop driven beers, or some of the ways that you then choose to push nuance in your fermentation to kind of capture some of this hop character. And obviously we know that, you're using a lot more lager yeast in this, or calling this beer, which is clearly not a Pilsner, Joe, calling it a West Coast Pilsner. But Zach and Steve, how does fermentation, then align with your other hopping beers, or take a different approach compared to those?
Well, I mean, I know I'm pretty boring. I'm very boring with fermentation things because we don't really experiment much. And, we have a house yeast. I know, Zach, I'm not going to speak for you, but I know you also have a house yeast. So I will say, as far as like fresh hop beers, wet hop beers go, our fermentation is, we treat it basically just like any other IPA we're doing every week. We've seen, we haven't used it enough to see if there's more dry hop creep potential with those 301s, because there is more vegetative matter, unkilled, unprocessed. I feel like it's 50% of the time we're like, wow, it's creeping more than it usually is, or we're surprised that it's not. For our West Coast, we'll do some variations of fresh hop beers. So when we do our West Coast IPA, then we're doing kind of the same thing Joe's doing and Bob's doing, where it's 3470 fermented, slow ramp warm kind of a thing. And I agree with those sentiments, but I'm like very boring as far as fermentation goes. I don't like to deviate. I know what I know. I'm a creature of habit.
Yeah, we're similar. And also similar to Joe, because Joe and I both kind of figured out how to make beer while we were at Odell. We use a German ale yeast, and we've found that German ale really works very, very well with fresh hops to make a really well-rounded, integrated beer. And because it has a really, really low propensity to create diacetyl, we just don't have to stress about it when we're really kind of, our schedule is a little bit nutty because of fresh hops, and we don't want to have to change it or risk creep or compromise because we're using a different yeast strain. Like last year during the fresh hop rodeos, we let people bring their own yeast, which we always had offered, but nobody really took us up on it. And last year, a lot of people brought American ale, Chico strains, and so we got to see, there was 9 different fermentations done that way with like yeast from probably 6 different breweries brought their own yeast. At least here, amongst our, the brewers here and our people, like we really didn't prefer any of those to what we can make with the German ale strain. A lot of it had to do with kind of not necessarily actually high diacetyl, but like just this perceived very like sub-threshold diacetyl level where it affects sweetness and kind of mouthfeel and body, but doesn't really come off as the actual flavor of diacetyl. But that diacetyl sense in there. I mean, that's our hunch on it. We don't test anything for that. So we're pretty consistent on German ale when we do fresh hop beers, and we might do a couple with 3470 or a lager strain this year, but for the most part, German ale, standard fermentation schedules for us.
Is there something about a body contribution of these fresh hops that somehow makes that, because what you're talking about isn't necessarily like perceptible diacetyl, but it's going to be a fullness or a, extra body character, that yeast might provide that, maybe you're getting in some other way and that may otherwise feel texturally overloaded. And I'm just
that's possible when you're just like stacking the two on top of each other, like a fullness from the hops or the chewiness, plus like what you might get from a American ale Chico yeast. We're not very familiar with those strains, and we're not good at managing diacetyl in them either. So like, I mean, there's that. Like we did those fermentations. Maybe they weren't the best they could have been because they were yeasts we didn't know as well, and we were also on a really tight schedule, so we couldn't. Yeah, anyway, but the case is the German ale strains work really well for fresh hop beers in our experience. And I think Joe also shows that in your case, it's similar fermentation profiles from what we've talked about.
100%. Yeah, we clearly love that yeast. So we use it in a lot of different beers. I think to your question, Jamie, I think there absolutely is something about that. I think there's like a kind of a mid-palate heft that if you think of a lot of West Coast IPAs, and I think, we think about how we've changed malt over the years and like just the construction of beers around like water profile and yeast. I think when you look at fresh hops, there is so much, I don't know if oil is the right word, but there's so much mid-palate heft stuff in that mid-palate that if you don't have a yeast that can give you kind of a sharpness or like a solid, like clean break from it. And I know Steve doesn't use German ale, but the yeast he does use has that, and I think that's why his fresh hops are really nice. I think there is something to that, like where you get a clean character that allows the hops to fill that mid palate that the yeast isn't filling.
Yeah, I think also along the same lines, when you're using a lot of wet hops on the hot side, similar to when you use really large dry hop loads in your fermenters, like the pH is pretty strongly affected. It really raises from pulling in all the stuff, from the vegetative matter, from the bract. And so we're pretty careful to make sure we start out with low pHs and that we acidify our wort more than we would normally for fresh hop beers in order to retain that balance throughout the beer. and not have it get too kind of flabby or rotten or however you describe that mouthfeel.
Zach, what are you acidifying to? We go to about 4.8, 4.9 on our wort for fresh hops.
We're still close to 5, 4.9 to 5 on fresh hop wort. We typically change the acid though and acidify with citric because it's just a little like sharper and brighter. And we've done some little benchtop trials and found that acidification helps eliminate some of the chlorophyll taste pretty quickly. Attenuates it.
Yeah, I remember what you were telling me about the citric acid addition, where that was like the first time I had heard that, and you can kind of taste it, but it works well with everything else that's like going on in that beer.
Yeah, you don't want to overdo it because you can taste it,
but you can taste lactic acid too, you know. So it's kind of, you know. No, I mean, like I guess I'll step in and talk about the pH thing too, because we've noticed the exact same thing. We modify, like, so our malt bills for fresh hop beers will have more acidulated malts than the mash. We don't really change our sparge acidification to any means, but we are adding more acidification, like adjustment to our whirlpool. Still mostly lactic acid, but you know, when Zach kind of gave up the citric acid trick, we're kind of doing a little more of a blend now. So you can kind of say 2/3 lactic, 1/3 citric, just to kind of pop it down to 5.0.
Yeah, we tend to use just more acidulated malt. We're big users of acidulated from Wireman for everything. It goes into everything down here. We have our pH coming in. So when you buy the alkaline waters at the grocery store, it should just come from Austin, because like we are at the upper threshold of what is like legally allowed to, you know, be groundwater for pH. So brewing with it, yeah, we put a lot of acidulated malt, and so just kind of we drive that even further down, and then yeah, we're still very lactic heavy in the whirl. But, you know, that's one of those things that comes, like, water profile is so fascinating, because you can talk about water from different parts of the country and how everything reacts so differently. And we found that, like, we have to get ours down in that 4.8, 4.9 for these kind of beers where, you know, you have a high hop load, or especially like any kind of fresh hop load. And I think it also is that German ale, like, we don't see the same pH drop that you see with like a Chico or some of the lager strains. And so we want to make sure we're still, you know, underneath that 4.8 finishing, which it honestly can be challenging with the German ale unless you're really acidifying early on. So yeah, we drive that down really far early on. And it helps with the snappiness of the beer, you know, like, because that chlorophyll gets so tactile if you're not treating it with any kind of acidification. And then, you know, Steve, to your point about like how quickly stuff falls off, you know, these beers, they can fall off so fast. I mean, I wax nostalgic about this, but you think back to fresh hops like a decade ago, and like after a week on a tap wall, they were terrible, right? Like you have the best practices in the brew house, and they're terrible.
But I mean, were you even measuring pH back then? Because I wasn't.
No. We had a pH
They were probably
meter.
dry hopped with wet cones.
Yeah. And like Zach,
We find our shelf life is good, but
I mean, we see like we canned a fresh hop for the first time last fall because of the 301, and it had the same shelf life as our other products. Like, it was delicious. It was, you know, we put all our beers at 90 days. You know, we want you to keep it cold. It tasted great still 2 and 3 months out, which was amazing.
But Joe, you're not selling the urgency of people coming out to get these beers.
No, you still have to go. You have to go to. I'll give the pitch for Yakima. You have to go to Yakima because you have to go to Zach's place, fly to Seattle, go to Steve's, make the drive over. But this is like, unless you understand what the sense of place is, you're you really can't brew to it. I think like you have to build those relationships as a brewer. You have to be able to understand what it means to be on that like drying room floor in the kiln and smell all that, and then go brew a beer that takes you back to that. I mean, I think that's what it goes back to the original question. That's what inspired me to make wet hops, fresh hops, whatever you want to call these beers in Austin, Texas. Is it transports you back to a time and place, and it means a lot, like when you're in there for the first time smelling those hops.
Zach, now the beer that from you that you were drinking, looking fresh, is a hazy beer.
Hazy beer, but that's just Kolsch.
And it's
That's
just that haze positive Kolsch yeast.
German ale. Yeah. It's a great house yeast as long as you don't want to make clear beer. Or as long as you don't want it to flock and be hard to harvest. It's awesome.
When you're looking at West Coast versus a hazier style of IPA, are there any other considerations that come into play with these fresh hop beers?
So this beer is brewed more like a West Coast IPA. It's a very simple malt bill, brewed to be relatively dry. It just has a residual haze from that German ale yeast. It's not hazy in the same sense that you get from a New England or a hazy IPA. The malt bills are pretty basic, and then the fermentation is to dryness, like 2.5, 3.0. Plato or so. What else did you want to know about this beer?
I don't know. Steve and Joe, are there finishing gravities that support your fresh hop idea, or are they pretty much in line with the rest of your IPAs?
Yeah, I mean, like ours are still pretty low. Our yeast finishes around 2 for most of our beers. Back on like the hazy thing too. I feel like we, similar to Zach, or probably similar to Joe too. You worded it like, the haze with the amount of like crazy polyphenol and just like vegetal component to it. Like we're not putting anything else in our beers other than like 2-row and Pils malt, carafoam acid. Like there's no wheat, there's no oats, there's nothing to kind of like give it more body than it's already going to get from that massive hop charge.
Yeah. So like, we've always had hazy beers. Like when we opened in 2012, like our IPAs were hazy because of the hot polyphenols. Like Steve mentioned earlier, he casually just is like, it's 20 pounds per barrel versus 6 or 7. Like 6 or 7 pounds per barrel is a lot of hops per barrel, right?
Well, it's that hot and dry.
Yeah.
That's a combo.
But that's it's a lot of hops per barrel, and that's how we've always been too, of like using a lot of hops per barrel. So we get a polyphenol haze, and there is a texture to that too, like it's not intentional. Like we're not, to Steve's point, like we don't use wheat, we don't use any, we're not trying to make our beers hazy. They're just hazy, and we don't own a filter or a centrifuge, and so they're hazy.
It's a nice world to live in these days,
Ambiguous haze.
Yeah. Ambiguous haze. That's a great beer name, Zach.
Very confusing. Yeah.
Well, maybe we close here, with just kind of a broader question. As other folks are thinking about brewing fresh hop beers, what's the primary thing that they should pay attention to and focus on? What are some of these difference makers? And maybe we'll start with you, Steve. What's for a brewer that hasn't brewed a fresh hop IPA or a fresh hop beer before, what do you think is the key thing they should pay attention to?
That's really tough. I think that for first, just like from a brewing like formulaic standpoint, like coming out to the Northwest in mid-October, come out for Fresh Hop Fest in Yakima, or come out a week or two later. Most Mosaic fresh hop beers aren't going to be out till mid-October anyways. And taste and see to kind of have a target. That's like what I do when I'm trying to figure out a new style. Like I want to actually taste as many versions of the style as fresh as possible, closer to the source as, just to kind of like wrap your palate around it.
And that Fresh Hop Festival is a great way to taste so many of these beers and really understand what's happening within that kind of realm.
Totally. I mean, like you're not gonna even this year. I think I think it's kind of less. There's less breweries, but more beer this year is what I've heard. So you're not gonna have as many wet hop beers at your disposal as a festival like anywhere in the world. So it's like come there and try, for better, for worse. I mean, you have to have a couple of duds every once in a while just to like realize like, oh, I wonder what they did there. Like, where are they adding it? Just so you know where you don't want to go, you know?
I'm going to say this as an outsider to the Valley and to Washington. If you can make one beer festival a year, the Fresh Hop Festival in Yakima is put it on your list. I've done it, I think, twice now only. Because it's always hard because I'm up for harvest so many times, but it's amazing. It's an absolutely amazing festival.
That one year you helped me pour, remember?
I actually helped you accept.
Came on stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun that year. I don't remember everything from that festival, but that was a fun year. Your mom's Cloudburst flag was amazing.
Every year.
I've been meaning to go. Maybe this is the year it finally happens.
I mean, Jamie, this is the year that it's not like, I'd say a third of the time it conflicts with GABF. So as far as like the same day, now that this season GABF is super early, Fresh Hop Fest is the second weekend of October, which is early, right?
It's about normal last few years.
7th or 8th of October. But
well, harvest might be early this year.
Yeah, by 2 days.
2 days, 7 days.
Zach, for you, if somebody is tackling fresh hop beer for the first time, what do you think are some of the key things they should pay the most attention to and focus most intently on?
Well, I think there's kind of two ways to think about it. One is like, what do you want to make and taste and like the flavor of it, like the brewing technicalities of it. Like we were just talking about, there's managing pH, contact time, and keeping it from being vegetal and kind of gross. But then I think to make it really special and interesting for the brewers who are making it, and then for the people who are going to be drinking it, like really finding a way to tell a story with the beer is what I think spending the most time on is what's most worth it. Even if you're just ordering and mailing in a bunch of hops, like there's still a lot that goes into that you can tell consumers about. Like if you're in a place where you're ordering hops, they're going to be frozen. There's still a lot of like process behind that the people who are going to be drinking are probably unfamiliar with because they're not actually in Yakima. They're not in the Northwest if you're like having to ship those hops. And if you are somewhere where you can just drive and get hops, trying to figure out how you can best tell the story of making that beer and who you got the hops from, and like then what you did with them, and like why it's interesting, and what's different about this versus a regular beer. And that's where I would put my attention if I was new to this, or even if you've done it a bunch. Like I think that's what makes them really, really special.
Well, hop harvest is one of my favorite times of year, and these days I keep trying to find ways to get back out there and be in the farms when these hops are coming off the vines. I think this year it's going to be Portland, Oregon, and the kind of Oregon grow area for me. And I hope that other brewers out there that are listening to this also take advantage of the opportunity to get out and watch, see and spend some times in these fields, getting to experience hops as they are coming fresh off of the vines and being harvested, and getting to experience that, because it's such a beautiful piece of this. And the beer that we make, the beer that you all make, can't exist without the agriculture that supports it. And so on that note, thank you all for sharing your thoughts on brewing fresh hop beers. G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and reliability with 24/7 service and support. Transform your next IPA into a stone fruit powerhouse with HS Grove from BSG. Trust the experts at Old Orchard to handle freight for your ingredients. AccuBrew helps you detect problems before they brew in a batch. ProBrew's rotary can fillers reduce waste and produce higher quality packaged beer. Tabsky QR code ordering is the future of brewery ordering. Omega's stylized yeasts bring intense guava and passion fruit aromas. out of your malts and hops, keep your brewery running smoothly with 5-star chemicals and ABS commercial is your full service brewery outfitter. I think I've drunk this entire bomber of Joe's beer, and I think I drink like 2 cans worth of Zach's beer here. And
Damn,
so
buddy.
I'm feeling fantastically fresh hopped right now.
That's why I didn't send you beer. I knew that was going to happen.
Hey, I drank yours, Steve. It's been good. Or at least one of them.
Jamie had my fresh hop at Firestone. We got to space them out when we're off season. It's like ours was a month before Zach's. You kind of
Shoot.
got to like slow space them.
I probably had yours at Firestone, but I'm not sure I remember it.
We put the work in. Just because. Steve, if people want to learn more about Cloudburst and the fresh hop beers that you make, where do they find you?
Well, we only use Instagram these days because Twitter's a shit show, and I haven't been on Facebook in a long time. So yeah.
It's not Twitter anymore, Steve. It's X. It's X. You got to call it X.
X.
Yeah.
So Instagram is the easy way to follow us for sure.
All right. I can't wait till I every time I hear that I think are they going to move their data center to Texas, because then you could say all my exes live in Texas.
What?
Boom.
Hold on.
So on that note, Joe, if people want to learn more about Pinthouse,
Yeah, we're right down the
You're-
road from
you're-
the Gigafactory, which is going to probably be the future home of the X Factory. So, Instagram's probably the best for us. It's just Pinthouse Brewing. Check us out. We got a website too. I think it's getting revamped, but Instagram is the best way. So look us up.
Zach, if people want to reach Single Hill and explore your fresh hopped beers, where do they find y'all?
Same. I would, follow Instagram during harvest time, and that's kind of where that will live. That's where we'll
If you
tell
want
those
to feel
stories.
jealous, just follow Single Hill's Instagram, because that's what I do, and it feels like I'm right there in the middle of harvest.
Or come visit
and,
us during harvest. The door's pretty open, so
The back
Yeah.
door is always open at Single Hill Brewery.
It is.
Hot-
I can
hot
attest to
tip.
that too. There's a camera.
Maybe
Though.
we'll-
There
maybe
is a
we'll-
camera over the back door.
Okay, all right.
So Zach will know you're there.
I've
Dude, there's
gone in
even more
there,
cameras
dropped
now.
a case of beer, walked out without a peep. It's just nothing.
yeah, that's why we never
Maybe-
see you. Come on, man, say hi.
Maybe we'll find another way this year to build some content around fresh hop brewing with you, Zach. But we will connect on that after this podcast. Nonetheless, thanks all of you guys for talking to me about fresh hop brewing. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Much appreciated.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.